In the previous segment, I announced to you the new book, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. The author, Dr. Thomas Coburn, was a practicing physician in Oklahoma until 2015. So he served as a U.S. representative from Oklahoma, 95 to 2001, but pledged to serve only 3 terms, so 3 two-year terms. Then after that, 2004, he ran for the U.S. Senate and served 2 terms, 2005 to 2014. In that sense, Dr. Coburn is absolutely a Washington insider, but he has said plainly in his new book, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, if you're looking for a solution from inside Washington, the exact quote, Americans will face further disappointment if they continue to wait for solutions from Washington. Senator Coburn, thanks so much for joining us today on The Line of Fire.
Well, thank you, sir, for having me.
Obviously, you have a perspective that the vast majority of Americans don't have, the perspective of someone who served within Washington and who knows the system, who knows life within the Beltway. Why did you feel the need to write this book and give it such a strong and forceful title?
Well, first of all, having spent 16 years of my most productive life trying to reduce the size of the federal government, restore the constitutional principles that our founders gave us, and learning that it can't be done in Washington, I left the Senate 2 years early in a hope to start awakening the states to the option that they have. And most people get a smile on their face when they find out they can actually make a difference in Washington and they don't have to do it through their representatives. And that's through a convention of states. Our founders gave it to us. They knew we were going to need to use it. Now, more than ever, do we need to use it. And it's a way for us to rein in the federal government, to limit the actually non-constitutional implications that come from unelected bureaucrats in Washington, and to start putting our house in order so that we actually don't jeopardize our children. And so, I went to Washington to try to fix our country and think long-term, and what I saw was short-term thinkers who were interested in political careers, not in fixing our problems.
So how would you then define the D.C. monopoly?
The D.C. monopoly is a confiscation of power from the states and individual freedoms, collectively grabbed by both the Supreme Court, the executive branch, and Congress, and implemented through unelected bureaucrats in Washington to enact a heavy toll of both debt and loss of freedom on the average American.
And why would these different branches and individuals do such a thing?
Well, because it's an elitism. All you have to do is look at history. There's never been a republic that survived. We're the longest-standing republic ever. George Mason said in the Constitutional Convention that they had, he said, do you know of any time in history where a central government voluntarily ceded back power to its citizens? And it's never happened. And so what we've seen is this accumulation of power and decision-making move to Washington, where people are disconnected from the reality of the individual states and disconnected to the best interest of people in the individual states. And our founders intended for the states to be the powerful portion of this relationship in terms of decision-making. And so that's gone. That's no longer there. And that's either through Supreme Court decisions that have ruined the Commerce Clause, or through overgrown expansion of the executive branch, and also through the ceding of the responsibility and power of the Congress to the executive branch.
All right, now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, so now we find ourselves with $144 trillion in unfunded liability and debt. We have a federal government bureaucrat telling us how much water will be in a toilet, what light bulb we'll eat, and how long our food should last, regardless of what the science may show behind that. So, and telling us how to build a highway that costs 50% more than if we built it to our own specs that lasts just as well and is just as good a highway, and running our education, telling us how we'll educate our kids, which is failing.
Yeah, and sometimes you can talk about some of this and it can sound abstract, and then you say, wait, yeah, our schools don't seem to be doing that well, and yeah, the roads don't seem to be, yeah, and why, who told us which light bulb to use? People start to realize, wait, is there a little bit of overreach here? Is there something happening that ought not to be happening? Senator, in your view, and you can speak with total candor, you don't have to worry about who you offend or don't offend. When President Trump, all right, well, good. But just, I know you're courteous and things like that and may wonder, which type of show you're on. But when President Trump speaks about draining the swamp, number one, is he talking about the same thing you were talking about? And number two, is it possible for it to be done within D.C.?
No, it's not possible for it to be done in D.C. He is talking about the same thing. I don't think you can drain the swamp. I think the power, the vested interest that's not in the best interest of our country will control it. But what you can do is you can put a muzzle on the alligators that are in the swamp. And we do that through a Article 5 Amendments Convention that forces them into a balanced budget using good accounting principles, general accepted accounting principles, limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the Commerce Clause, which is what gives the power of all these agencies to tell us in the states what we'll do through a misinterpretation by the Supreme Court in 1931, and limit the terms of both appointed and elected officials. You do those three things, our country will come back a lot. One of the things that most people don't realize is we have 100 million Americans that have never seen America at its greatest.
What was America at its greatest like?
Yeah, they don't know what we can do. And what they think is they're willing to accept what the status quo is today, growing less than 2%. High percentage of people not getting educated. I mean, think about what that implies, and a deficit for the millennial generation of $30,000 per year in their standard of living because we won't act responsibly.
All right, so you see right now, as our nation polarizes in different ways, you'll hear like California on the liberal side saying, well, we may just secede from the Union, and Texas on the conservative side, well, we may just secede. What can states actually do? I mean, people would hear this and think, okay, but I don't know what to do. How do we do it? But we seem paralyzed by the power of Washington, and it's nice to talk about it, but how do you actually do this?
Well, there's 2.3 million people helping us do this right now. So if you want to restore the balance of power, if you want to limit Washington and bring back power to your own state representative where you can actually have an influence, if you want to protect our kids going forward, if you want to limit the scope and jurisdiction of unelected bureaucrats, then you can do something. And here's what you can do. You can go to conventionofstates.com. You can sign up to be one of the volunteers around the country, learn about what we're doing, call your representative, sign a petition that asks that representative to sponsor Convention of States as a resolution that has nothing to do with governors, it's only the legislature, and become another state that actually has passed this. 12 states have already passed this. And the Article 5 says you got to have 2/3 of the states, so that's 34. So we're well over a third of the way there, and you can actually make an individual difference by becoming part of the grassroots army that's going to fix our country. Most people are aware that Washington is sick, and they're kind of depressed about it. We can change things, we can change who we say, but it's the same old thing. And that's because we're treating symptoms and not disease. The disease is an out-of-control, extra-constitutional government now that our founders never foresaw and never expected to happen in terms of the length to which it got. But they did put in this safety valve for us as states to call a convention of amendments to change the Constitution to rein in the power of the Washington government and restore the power to the state as it was intended. So they can do something, and they can do it tomorrow. They can read this book and understand the history that our founders put in, why we need to do it, how it works, how it will come about, why it's safe, and why it's the only solution that's big enough to fix the problems that we have.
Again, friends, the book Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn, M.D., using Article 5 to restore freedom and stop runaway government. Senator Coburn, do you have just a couple more minutes to answer a few more questions?
Sure, happy to.
All right. Listen, we've got a break in about 45 seconds, but can you give us the quickest overview of Article 5?
Yes. Article 5 says in the Constitution, whenever 2/3 of the states agree that they want to have amendments to the Constitution, they can call an amendments convention. Congress sets the time and the location. They can meet and they can make amendments to the Constitution. All they are is recommendations, however, because they have to go back to the states, and 38 states have to agree that these recommendations are what we should do. So all they are is, we're calling an amendments convention made up of commissioners from every state. Each state gets one vote, and they make recommendations back to the state.
All right, friends, we've got a few more minutes with former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn. His important new book, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. Sounds like urgent reading to me. We'll be right back. I mentioned in the very first segment of this hour that Ivanka Trump said that she was surprised or shocked by the viciousness of Washington. Well, it's not just viciousness. You've got a real stronghold there. And former U.S. Senator and medical doctor Tom Coburn has put his focus on that stronghold in a new book, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, using Article 5 to restore freedom and stop runaway government. Senator Coburn, what about term limits? Is that something that would go a long way to solving this problem as well?
Well, it would change the dynamic of the conflict of interest. I term limited myself every time, and it really helped me focus on why I was there, not the next election. And the other thing is, when you put term limits in, you get a whole different group of people running for office. You get people who are experienced in real life. They haven't been a career politician their whole life. And so what happens is you bring wisdom, experience, judgment that most of the careerists don't have. So, yeah, I think it's the third plank of what we've asked for in our application for an Article 5 convention, is putting term limits, not just on them, but on federal judges. You know, the average age of federal judge, time of service, the first 100 years in our country was 6 years.
Wow.
Not 32 like it is today. So what happened is they came with experience, they served for a period of time, and they left.
Yeah. And they also weren't serving at a point where they weren't effective anymore. I just read about a boxing judge. There was a boxing match, and it was an overwhelming victory for fighter A over fighter B. And this guy scored it right, but he mixed up the two people. So when it was read publicly, the guy that lost overwhelmingly was given one verdict that he won, and the guy's now banned from doing this because he's 80. And he obviously wasn't that sure. He saw the thing correctly, but they realized he was declining in skills. This is for a boxing match. You can say, okay, you're not that sharp anymore. We can't have you. And yet we have lifelong justices that could, who knows how sharp they are, but they can still be functioning. That's an aside, and obviously not the only part of the problem. What are the first two planks then that you've put forward?
The first plank is to have them be financially responsible, a balanced budget amendment using generally accepted accounting principles, and without raising taxes. In other words, a tax limitation amendment along with that, so that the career politician has to make the hard choice. Right now they don't. They just pass it on down and charge it to our kids. The second component is to return the federal government back to the scope of what it was intended. Thomas Jefferson said this about education. He's the father of modern education in America. He founded the University of Virginia, was for education. But he said for the federal government to be involved in education would require an amendment to the Constitution. We've spent $3.7 trillion since 1976 in education in America, federally, and there's not one parameter that's better, and most are far worse. Now, that may or may not be associated with the federal government, but the fact is when the federal government's telling local school boards what they can and can't do, then we got a real problem, because it should be teachers, parents, and administrators saying what we can and can't do when it comes to educating our kids. Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And even the Common Core push now is making many more and more aware of this. And then just to give one case in point, you mentioned in the book the Indiana turnaround under Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels proves that real determination to reduce government spending and debt can succeed without a decline in public services. So you're saying one of the planks you put forward, these things can be done.
Sure, but when first of all, there's no experience in the politicians in Washington to do it. Number two, there's no will to do it, because when you cut spending, especially when it's wasteful, that has a constituency, and they don't want to hear from that constituency, so they just don't cut it. I took $400 billion worth of spending that was concluded by the Government Accountability Office to the Senate, and I said, let's get rid of it. It's all duplication, waste, fraud. Let's write a bill. I couldn't get anybody to help me, with rare exception. I could not get anybody to help me do that. So, and the reason is, when you ask them why, is no, all that waste has a constituency. I don't want to make people mad. So they'd rather let our kids fall through the cracks in the future than fix the real problems. And that's the problem with career politicians. They refuse to make hard choices because hard choices impact their political career. And so we have this I want to be popular rather than I want to be trusted. And we can have statesmen that are trusted, but not everybody always agrees with them, but they still trust them to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. Even those are disconcerting downside effects of doing the right thing. And we have to embrace courage again in our country. We have to lead from courage. We have to lead from integrity and character-centered leadership that's sacrificial, that says my political career doesn't matter. What matters is the future of our country.
So with that, then, just in our last minute, Senator, do you have hope for America? Is it too late to turn the ship, or do you have hope that things could be restored to what was initially intended?
Oh, no, it can be restored. But the American people are going to be the people that have to restore it. That's why this grassroots army that we have and we're building, we're going to grow it to about 10 million people, we hope, have volunteers that will help us hold legislators accountable in the State House to actually put control back on. See, the balance of power was actually given to the state legislators. They have the power to control the federal government. They just haven't exercised. And what we want the states to do is to call this convention so we can actually put the genie back in the box and limit the federal government and let decisions be made close to home where we can actually have some impact on them. So our freedom. Here's the final point I'll leave you with. A big government smothers your liberty. But more importantly, it smothers the desire for liberty. And that's how republics die.
Yeah, that's a thought to leave us with, sir, for sure. And the website again to go to? conventionofstates.com. All right, friends.
The book is Smashing the D.C. Republic.
Got it.
Smashing the D.C. Monopoly.
Yep, conventionofstates.com, the book by former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. Thank you, sir, for your courage in speaking the truth. May America be changed. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. God bless you.